Hello and welcome to Torah Thoughts. I want to start by saying I hope everyone had a wonderful Pesach, but unfortunately we know that there were many people who did not. During the holiday of Pesach itself, many people died, people are still dying, and the tragedy seems to be continuing, although we're hearing some good news that the numbers are tapering off with hospital admissions, intubations, even the death rate, and so on. But still, every death is a tragedy. And again, I want to start off this particular video, like I did the others, with a prayer that God should take this dreaded plague away from us, and may it only hit evil people, and may all decent people in the world who are suffering from this be cured, and may this become a thing of the past. Now, the portion of the Torah that we read this week is Parshat Shmini. It means the eighth. It starts with Vahi Bayom HaShmini, and so it was on the eighth day. What I find interesting about that is that today, the day after Pesach, is the eighth day of the counting of the Omer. That is the counting down. We're counting 50 days until Shavuot, the anniversary of actual receiving, 49 days. The 50th day would be Shavuot, the anniversary of the receiving of the Torah. And there are no coincidences in life, certainly not in the Torah. And so I find it interesting that the Parsha Shmini, which literally means the eighth day, always happens on the eighth day of the Omer. The day immediately following Pesach is always Parshat Shmini. In any event, so this week's Parsha, it starts off with the eighth day following what? I mentioned earlier in a different Torah thought that Aaron, the high priest, and his sons were, before they were ordained as Kohanim, as priests, they had to go through a 7-day fulfillment period, a period of perfecting themselves, perfecting their faith, as it were. And having gone through that 7-day fulfillment, and the eighth day, the process begun, where in essence they were ordained and inaugurated into the temporary temple, the Mishkan. And so it starts off, Vahi Bayom HaShmini kara Moshe la'Aaron u'levanav u'leziknei Israel. On the eighth day, Moshe called forth Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. And he went on to explain to them the processes that are supposed to happen, what kind of sacrifices they're supposed to bring for the ordination. And it says, as they did all of that, Vayavo Moshe el Aharon, Vayavo Moshe ve'Aharon el Ol Moed, and Moshe and Aharon came into the Ol Moed, the tent of the meeting, which is, in essence was the largest portion, I suppose, of the Beit HaMikdash, the inner courtyard. Vayetzu, and they went out. They went in, and they did their procedure. They did whatever ritual they were supposed to do, and then they went out. Vayevarchu et ha'am, and they blessed the nation. Vayera kvod Hashem el ha'am, and the glory of God appeared before the nation. Now I find it interesting. Again, I don't know how it ties in. I just want to put it out there that several times it says, that the nation of Israel had to perform certain services, and God's glory would appear before them. And the word for glory in Hebrew in this context is kavod. In some dialects, in some accents, it's pronounced kovid. Probably the most accurate one. And I find it very striking that the word kovid, or kavod, or kovod, or whichever way you pronounce it, so similar to COVID, appears so many times over the past few weeks in the Torah, and particularly now, it is the eighth day of their fulfillment period. Now they're about to be ordained, and Moshe says, "Okay, God's COVID will appear before you." And again, the Kavod Hashem appeared before the nation, and I find the story in this particular parsha, the story that this parsha is very, very famous for, I find it so. As I was reading the parsha, it was just right there before my eyes, so eerily similar to something we're going through right now. So just to go through what actually happened, they went through this whole procedure, the whole ordination, and it was a huge celebration. And it says that God's essence, God's glory, came out before the nation. It says, "Vaytetze Eish milifnei Hashem, and a fire came out from before God, v'tochal el hamizbeach, and it consumed what was on the altar, et ha'olah, it consumed the carbon olah that was before the altar, v'tachlavim, and the fat parts that are offered up on the altar. Vayar kol ha'am, and the whole nation saw this fire, and that I suppose represented God's presence, God's glory. It says, Vayarnu, and they screamed, Vayiplu al pneim, and they fell upon their faces. Falling upon their faces, actually, the expression really means they bowed. They put their faces down to the ground, and they bowed. So this was, you can imagine what a moment this was. The temple, the tabernacle, the Mishkan, it's finally being inaugurated. The Kohanim have been ordained, and now the service is beginning to take place, and literally everyone sees, the best way to describe it is, they saw God's presence. They saw the fire literally come down from God and consume what was on the altar. And you can imagine what a holy, lofty, celebratory moment that was. And what happens immediately afterwards is shocking. So it says, Vayikhu b'nei Aaron, Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's oldest sons, took a fire. They took a torch, or a fire pan, something that carries fire, and they went and offered incense before the altar inside the Mishkan. And as a result of that, what happens? Vatetze eish milifnei Hashem, fire came out from before God. Again, a fire came out and consumed the sacrifice. Vatochal otam, and it consumed them. The fire actually, the Midrash explains, it went in through their nostrils and burnt them from the inside. In essence, it killed them. And they died before God. So picture this tremendous celebration. The entire nation was at the Mishkan with this milestone event, this tremendous, they've already experienced coming out of Egypt, they've experienced the receiving of the Torah, and now the service, the relationship between the nation and God is about to begin in practice. And Aaron HaKohen's two oldest sons are suddenly killed. Just picturing the emotional, what goes on in such a thing, it's almost indescribable. And so what does Moshe say to Aaron at such a time, right? Moshe says to Aaron, Hu asher diber Hashem, this is what Hashem said, Lemor, he said, Bekrovai ekadesh, I will be sanctified through those nearest to me. Val pnei kol ha'am echabed, and I will get, again, there's that word kovid, chabed. Echabed, I will be glorified, I will gain my glory within the nation through those closest to me. And Rashi explains that what Moshe was telling Aaron was that when God said that, I assumed that at some point or another either you or I will be taken, you or I will die, and somehow or another through that process God will be glorified. And turns out that your sons seem to have been greater than me or you, because it was through them that God chose to sanctify himself. Vayidom Aaron, and Aaron remained silent. Aaron didn't complain. You can imagine he just lost his two sons. And in fact, we see from here that Aaron, again, the 7 days of fulfillment that Aaron and his sons needed to go through, remember, because they didn't have faith in the outcome of the situation with the golden calf, and that's why Aaron stole, and so on. And over here, again, faith, not meaning about what the outcome will be, but about whether or not the outcome is proper. Aaron just lost his two sons in such an incredibly tragic, well, it's always tragic, but while the celebration was supposed to take place, just like that, it turns into tragedy, and he was quiet. He didn't try to explain it, he didn't try to complain, he simply accepted it. And there's many commentaries and explanations. It's a pretty straightforward explanation. Why did Nadav and Avihu die? Well, what it says is when they performed the incense, when they offered the incense in the Mishkan, it says Vayakriv l'fnei Hashem ish zara. They offered before God a foreign or an alien fire. What does that mean, alien? Midrash explains, and Rashi explains, it's because God didn't tell him to offer that incense. God gave instructions how to offer sacrifices, how to offer incense, how to perform service in the temple. He never said anything about performing that kind of incense, and he said, "Don't perform anything that I don't tell you to." And so Nadav and Avihu, meaning well, they went ahead and did something for the sake of God's glory, but counter to his instructions, and it cost them their life. And I'm guessing, and I'm sure that in plenty of areas, in plenty of places, it explains this. How is God sanctified by that? Because God shows, when I say ABC, and not XYZ, you do ABC, you get rewarded. You do XYZ, you die. And then that actually happens. That shows that God is the true power in the universe. People will question, well, is God merciful? How can that be? And of course, those are very difficult questions to attack, and I'm not going to address that at the moment. Because I want to bring this back to how it connects to our situation today. In January, on January 1st actually, I attended, along with 93,000 other Jews, the biggest celebration I'd ever experienced. And that was the Siyum Hashas, where the Daf Yomi, where we learn a page of Gemara every day, it gets completed. It's a 7.5-year cycle where the entire Talmud gets completed, and 100,000 people gathered at MetLife Stadium to celebrate this. And simultaneously, it was in Barclays Stadium and in other locations all around the world, in stadiums and arenas and you name it. There must have been, I'm sure, close to 1 million people celebrating this thing, all within, and there were other celebrations that took place within the span of a few weeks, celebrating this thing. It was, MetLife was the big, in numbers wise, it was the biggest one. And I remember standing on the field and looking up at the crowd. It was captivating to see so many people all celebrating Torah. And the people there, of course, the people leading the celebration, they were the leaders of Torah. To get a gathering of Torah giants in one place like that alone was incredible. All of them in the center field on the dais. And what happened in the blink of an eye, little did we know that at that time, death was already marching towards us. The coronavirus had already begun to make its way from China into the United States. Many people suspect that they had it in December or January. But certainly it was already on its way, and so many Torah leaders died from this. The God, in essence, is, how is it a sanctification of God's name? We don't know yet. But certainly an event as colossal as this has to, at some point or another, lead to God's sanctification of God. And who is being taken in the process? Torah giants. I mean, I would imagine, I haven't kept track, but I would imagine many of the people who were on that stage at center field in MetLife Stadium are no longer with us. Tragedy after tragedy. Every time you open up the news, another rabbi, another Torah giant, another Torah great. And if you look at the sanctification, God sanctified himself through Nadav and Avihu, but he didn't simply sanctify himself, okay, I'm going to take them. They did something wrong in order to trigger that process. And we saw over here also when the coronavirus broke out. Now remember, Nadav and Avihu, they meant right. They meant well. They wanted to do something to honor God. They just did it counter to God's instructions. And when this whole thing broke out, and people were talking about social distancing and no large gatherings, people continued with weddings. And a wedding is a mitzvah. It's a huge Jewish tradition. People continued with crowded weddings, going to the mikveh. A mikveh is holy. Yeah, we know that. And they went, of course, you have to go to shul and minyan and all that stuff. But remember, are you doing it because you want to think up your own method of glorifying God, or are you doing it because it's God's instructions? In this case, sadly, it was not God's instructions. And I can't get into the minds of the people who made those decisions, rabbis, Torah leaders. But it was counter to God's instructions. Why? Because God instructed us that paramount among all of our commandments are, v'nishmartem od lenafshotechem. Guard your life. If there's a question, if there's a suspicion that one life could be in danger, we're supposed to violate all but 4 other commandments in deference to this commandment to guard our lives. So when you say, I'm so devoted to God that I'm gonna have a minyan, no, that's not the instruction that God gave you. God gave us a Torah 3,300 years ago, and God knew 3,300 years ago that there would be a coronavirus in the year 2020 of the Common Era. And if you don't believe that God knew that 3,300 years ago, then you're not ready to understand Torah. God knew there would be a coronavirus, and He instructed us within that context. And He gave us instructions. He said, go to shul, have a minyan, go to the mikveh, do all these mitzvahs, and celebrate, help a bride and a groom celebrate a wedding. But above all of that, protect your life. And one of the conditions of all these mitzvot is v'chai behem, and you should live by them. And we're taught what it means is, and not die by them. When God gives us these commandments, that means you put it all together. God's commandment was, do not go to shul. Do not keep the schools open because the children will bring the coronavirus unknown home to their parents, who may even give them to the grandparents. Do not do things that place yourself in danger. And it's not even though I'm sure they meant it as devotion to God, it is not in actuality a devotion to God when you violate those rules, you violate those commandments, and you'd have all these gatherings anyway because you want to be extra devoted to God. No, that's contrary to the instructions. The same with Nadav and Avihu. They went contrary to the instructions because they wanted to glorify God. But as a result, they violated His instructions. And they were taken for His glorification. We have lost so many giants. And among other people, it's been so tragic. Let's accept that we follow the Torah and not invent better ways. I like to use the phrase, don't be more frum than the Torah. Follow the Torah, sanctify God. If your life is in danger and you have to eat chametz on Pesach to save your life, eat the chametz on Pesach. If your life is in danger and you have to eat pig, you have to eat pork, which by the way is in this week's parsha, not eating pork. If you have to eat pork to save your life, eat the pork. That's a mitzvah. Let's keep the mitzvot the way they were intended, the way God instructed us. And hopefully this thing will go into the past. And may everyone who's suffering from this see complete recovery and return to full health, and maybe return to a better life than we had before all this started. That's my Torah thought. What's yours? Thank you for watching. Shabbat Shalom.